Today I'm making sourdough pizza. The recipe starts off with 100 grams of freshly fed starter, 525 grams of water, 15 grams of oil, and 15 grams of salt. Once you have everything in the bowl and you've added your water to your starter and your oil and your salt, you're going to incorporate everything really well together. You want to get that starter broken up so that it's basically just a plain liquid before you add your flour. Now, I'm not an expert with sourdough or even pizza making. It's just something that I do at home, but this is what works for me. After everything is incorporated, you're going to want to add 625 grams of flour. And this will become kind of a wet, sticky dough. So don't worry about that. Once you get everything kind of incorporated and it's sat for a while, covered up on your counter, it'll become a beautiful dough that makes fantastic pizza in just a few hours. Now, doing the stretch and folds is going to add some strength to the dough. And as you can see here, it's a very wet dough. This is on my second set of stretch and folds that you're watching. So the very first time through, it was so wet and so sticky, but you just wet your hands, stick through it, and it will come out to be a beautiful dough. I promise you, if you just stick with it, it will. And you can always add flour when you're at the very end if it's too wet, but you don't want to add any more flour to this. It might feel like you should, but just don't do it. You just need to trust the process and it will work out fabulously. So after you finish your last stretch and fold, you're just covering up your dough and letting it sit in a nice warm spot in your kitchen for about 4 to 5 hours. This recipe makes 2 nice-sized pizzas or 4 individual pizzas. This is the point in the recipe when you are starting to work with the dough. You might sprinkle just a little bit of flour down. This is a wet, sticky dough, so just be careful of that. Just add a little bit of flour. You don't want to add too much to it because it'll make it impossible to work with. I am just stretching them out very gently. You don't want to be rough with this. You're not going to use a rolling pin on this. You want to keep the crust so that it still has some of the air in it so that you get that wonderful sourdough rise. And as you start stretching the dough, you might realize that it doesn't want to stretch anymore. Put the dough down at that point, give it maybe 5 to 10 minutes at the most, time to relax, and then it'll be easy to stretch even further. Now, as you can see, I have a mat that has different size circles on it. I believe this is for pie making. I've never used it for that. I've never made a pie. But that's what I use to make my pizzas and kind of give me an idea of how big that I'm making them. If you get a hole in your pizza like you're going to see that I have here, you can just touch it up because it's a wet dough. It will stick to each other. But I'm making about 14-inch pizzas. I've even used this dough to make pepperoni rolls and calzones before. So it's a very easy to use forgiving dough. I find the best way to work with this wet dough is to lay it down on parchment paper. When I put it in the oven, I leave it in the oven on the parchment paper for the first 5 minutes, and then I pull the parchment paper out so that the bottom of the dough can get a nice crispy edge. If you've ever made regular pizza dough using regular yeast, you know that it is a drier dough, a little bit easier to use than this, but the effort is definitely worth it. This is the point where creativity takes place. I use the tomato sauce that I had just posted there. You use whatever it is that you love on top of your pizzas. We eat it pretty plain and simple here. We either eat plain cheese or pepperoni pizza, and we have this every single Friday. So I hope that you will give this a try. Super easy. It goes into the oven 5 minutes on 500, take the parchment paper out, and let it finish baking until it's done the way that you like it. Thank you for joining me here at White Shadow Fare. As always, the recipe is listed below, and I hope that if you give it a try, you love it as much as we do.